The morning I signed our divorce papers, my wife was across town being photographed for a fundraiser. Bald, brave, dying. 3 years she'd worn the scarves. 3 years she took the meal trains, the pity, the checks. A dying woman gets the children, she told me once, smiling over the kids' cereal. That's how this ends. And it nearly did. My daughter learned to hate me on schedule. My son flinched when I said goodnight. Then, at the pharmacy counter that same morning, a man in a white coat frowned at his screen and said, "Sir, there's nothing here for her. Nothing. Ever." I made him say it twice. Then I drove to that fundraiser, and I asked to hold the microphone for 1 minute. I'm Theo, 34, and for 3 years I let a whole town call me a coward rather than fight a dying woman. I just didn't know yet that she wasn't dying, and that the quietest kid at my kitchen table had already started to wonder. Let me tell you what a coward looks like in a town like Delmar, Ohio. He looks like a man standing at the edge of a school parking lot, waiting for permission to wave at his own children. That was me. Most Fridays. I'd park where Nora asked me to park, far end by the fence, so the other kids don't see. 11 years old, and she'd already learned to be ashamed of me. I built things for a living. Licensed electrician, foreman on commercial jobs, the guy they call when the wiring in a 40-year-old building doesn't make sense. I was good at it because I was patient. I read the whole system before I touched a single wire. I wrote everything down. My crew joked that I kept receipts for receipts. That habit is the only reason I'm here to tell you this. Vanessa was my wife for 11 years. We married young. I was 21, she was 20. Nora came in 2015. Sam in 2018. For a long time, I thought we were fine. Not happy exactly. Fine. I mistook quiet for peace. Then the spring of 2023, I told her the truth. I said I didn't think we were making each other better anymore. I wasn't cruel about it. I said I wanted to do it right, counseling first, and if that failed, a fair split, both of us in the kids' lives. She looked at me for a long moment. Then she said, "You don't get to leave me." Not please, not I'm hurt. You don't get to leave me. I should have heard it for what it was. A line in a war I didn't know had started. 6 weeks later, she gathered the kids at the kitchen table and told them Mommy was sick. Cancer, breast cancer, stage 2, she said. She'd been to the doctor, there would be treatment, hard treatment, and she would lose her hair, and she would be very tired, and she needed everyone to be strong. Then she looked at me across the table in front of our children, and she said, "And Daddy already told me he can't handle a sick wife, but we'll be okay without him." Sam was 5. He started to cry. Nora, 8 then, put her arm around him like she was already the adult. And I sat there. I want you to understand. I sat there because in that first minute, I believed her. Your wife says the word cancer and every argument you've ever had evaporates. I reached for her hand. I said we'd get through it together. All of it. That I wasn't going anywhere. She pulled her hand back. "You already went," she said, softly, "for the kids." That was the day the story was written. And I didn't get a vote. Here's what the next months looked like from the outside. Vanessa shaved her head one Sunday and posted the photo. 600 reactions. Meal trains organized by the church. A GoFundMe her mother set up. Help Vanessa fight. That crossed $11,000 by August. Neighbors I barely knew leaving casseroles on the porch and looking through me like a smudge on glass. And the story that traveled with all of it. Brave young mother, 2 little kids, and a husband who bailed the second things got hard. I moved into a 1-bedroom apartment over on Cutter Street because she asked me to give her space to heal. I paid the mortgage on the house anyway. I paid it for 3 years. I kept carrying the family health insurance through my union. I was the one with coverage because I told myself, whatever else is broken. The kids need doctors and she needs treatment. That decision, the one everyone would have called me a fool for, is the second reason I'm here to tell you this. Because I was the policyholder. And a policyholder, it turns out, can see everything the plan pays for. I didn't know that mattered yet. In 2023, I wasn't looking. I was just a man trying to be decent to a woman I thought was dying, and children who'd been taught I was the reason she was. The first time Nora flinched from me was that October. I hugged her at the car door, and she went stiff, arms flat at her sides, and whispered something I made her repeat. "Mommy says you stopped loving us when she got sick." I knelt down on that cold asphalt. I said, "Nora, I love you more than anything on this earth. That will never stop. I said it as steady as I could. She looked at me the way you look at a stranger who knows your name. That's what a liar would say, she said. 8 years old. And I understood, kneeling there, that I was not fighting a divorce. I was fighting for the inside of my daughter's head, and someone had gotten there first. The school was the worst of it, in a way, because school is where a town keeps its official memory of who you are. There was a parent-teacher conference that November. I'd requested it, the way you're supposed to. I sat in a small chair built for a child while Nora's teacher, a kind and careful woman named Mrs. Faulkner, arranged papers she didn't need to arrange and finally said, not unkindly, "Mr. Ashbrook, I have to be honest. The family has asked us to be sensitive to what the girls are going through at home with their mother's illness. So if there's tension between the parents, we'd really prefer to keep the children out of the middle." Keep the children out of the middle, as if I were the tension, as if I'd put anyone anywhere. I said the only thing I could say without setting off the alarm on my own character. I want that too. I want them out of the middle more than anyone. Can you just tell me, how is Nora? Really? Mrs. Faulkner softened just slightly. She's carrying a lot, she said. She reads 3 grades ahead, and she watches everything, and she never, ever asks for help. She's the most grown-up 8-year-old I've ever taught. A pause. Kids like that worry me the most. They hold it all, so no one else has to. She didn't know she was describing exactly what was being done to my daughter. She thought she was describing a girl being brave about her mother's cancer. She was describing a girl being made responsible for a lie and calling it maturity. And I couldn't correct her, because the moment I opened my mouth to say the words "something is wrong here," I'd become the bitter ex trashing a dying woman to a teacher, and that story was already sitting in Mrs. Faulkner's chair, waiting for me to confirm it. So I said thank you, and I folded myself out of the child's chair, and I drove home. And I added Mrs. Faulkner's kindness to the long, quiet list of good people who were, without knowing it, holding the door shut on me from the inside. If your chest is tight right now, if you've ever been on the wrong end of a story you couldn't correct, do me a favor and hit like and subscribe so this reaches other people who know that specific kind of quiet. And tell me in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is there. I read them. It helps to know I'm not talking into an empty room. Now let me tell you how deep this went before I ever saw the bottom. For a year and a half, I played the game I thought was the only decent game. I did not badmouth their mother, not once. Every book, every counselor, every instinct I had said the same thing. Children do not need 2 parents at war. They need 1 parent who stays calm. So I stayed calm. I showed up for the every other weekend I was allowed. I brought Nora to her swim meets and Sam to his dinosaur museum, and I never, ever said the words I wanted to say, which were, "Something is wrong here, and I don't know what." Vanessa's mother, Diane, moved in to help with care. Diane had spent her whole life being the woman who takes care of the sick one. Her own mother, then an aunt, then a husband. Being needed was the only role she'd ever felt tall in. And now her daughter needed her more than anyone ever had. You could see it in her. Grief, yes. But under the grief, something almost like purpose. Almost like relief. Diane ran the fundraiser. Diane ran the meal train. Diane ran I would learn a great deal more than that. The custody hearing came in the spring of 2024. I walked in thinking a judge would see a working father who'd never missed a payment and never raised his voice. I walked out with every other weekend and a Wednesday dinner, because across the aisle sat a bald woman in a headscarf, thin, shaking, with a doctor's note in her lawyer's folder, and 2 children who told the custody evaluator, in their own small voices, that Daddy left when Mommy got sick. Diane testified, she said, and I remember it exactly. No judge in this country takes children from a woman with cancer, and no judge should. The room agreed with her. I could feel it. The judge's face, the clerks, even my own lawyer back then, a cheap guy I could barely afford, leaned over and said, "Theo, don't fight the medical piece. You'll look like a monster." So I didn't fight the medical piece. That's the sentence I'd take back if I could take back one. I didn't fight the one piece that was a lie, because everyone told me a decent man doesn't interrogate a dying woman's diagnosis. She got primary custody. I got weekends and a Wednesday and a reputation as the man who abandoned his family. Vanessa found me in the parking lot afterward, alone. She waited until Diane had the kids in the car. She wasn't shaking anymore. Funny how that works. "A dying woman gets the children," she said, quiet, almost gentle. "That's how this ends, Theo. You should have just stayed." Then she turned and walked to the car with a straight back and a steady step. And I stood there holding a manila folder full of pay stubs that had proven nothing. My sister Iris was the only person alive who never believed the story for 1 second. Iris is 4 years older than me, an emergency room nurse in Columbus, 20 years on the job, and she has watched more people lie about their own bodies than anyone I know. The night I lost custody, she drove 90 minutes to sit on my apartment floor with a bag of gas station food and let me not talk. Around midnight, she finally said it. "Something is off, Theo, and I'm not saying that to make you feel better." She set down her coffee. "I have sat with hundreds of chemo patients. The exhaustion is not a costume you take off for school pickup. Either your wife is the one cancer patient in history who rallies exactly on the weeks there's a hearing, or she's lying. Those are the two options. I don't have a third." "You can't say that to anyone," I said. "You hear how it sounds." "I hear exactly how it sounds," she said. "That's why she's going to get away with it. You can't disprove a feeling, and right now, all you've got is a feeling and a folder of pay stubs." She was right on every count, and it would take me 2 more years to earn a third option. In the meantime, I learned what a town does to a man it has decided about. There was a Walk for Vanessa that first autumn, a Sunday 5K, pink shirts, a banner, 140 people looping the middle school track. Diane organized it. My own kids walked it in little pink shirts with their mother's name on the back. I wasn't told about it. I found out because I drove past the school and saw the balloons, and I recognized my son's jacket from the road. I parked. I stood at the fence in the far lot, the same fence Nora would later ask me to park behind, and I watched my children walk a lap for a disease their mother didn't have, and I watched 140 people I'd wired houses for, coached Little League beside, shared a pew with, cheer them on, and every single one of them, at some point, glanced at the man alone at the fence and looked away. A woman I'd known since high school walked her dog past me on the sidewalk. Deb. We'd graduated together. She slowed down, and for a second I thought she'd say something kind. "You've got some nerve," she said, showing up to watch. That's the thing nobody warns you about. It isn't the villain who breaks you. It's the 100 decent people who take the villain's word because the villain's version lets them feel like they're on the side of the angels. Cruelty is easy to spot. It's the kindness, aimed the wrong way, at the wrong person, over a lie, that hollows you out. I didn't argue with Deb. I drove home, and that night I wrote it down, the date and the words, the way I write everything down, because writing it down was the only power I had. A blank page is a terrible weapon, but it's the one they let you keep. Iris called me that night. I told her about Deb, about the pink shirts, about my son's jacket from the road. "Write down every single thing," she said. "Dates, times, who said what. I know it feels useless. Do it anyway. Someday a feeling isn't going to be enough, and you're going to need a record. And Theo," she paused, "keep paying that insurance. Whatever you do, keep being the one whose name is on the plan." I didn't know why she said it. I don't think she fully knew either. Nurses just have a sense for where the paper trail lives. 2 years later, that sentence would be the thing that saved my children. I want to be honest about the 2 years in the middle, because the middle is where they get you. Nothing dramatic happened. That's the trap. There was no single scene where the truth cracked open. There was just a slow drip of a boy and a girl being taught, weekend by weekend, that their father was a hole where a good man should have been. Sam stopped calling me Dad and started calling me Theo, because that's what the adults at his mother's house called me. And he was 5, and then 6, and then 7, and he wanted to belong. Nora got colder in a more deliberate way. She'd been given a job. Protect Mommy. She took it seriously, the way she took everything seriously. I kept a box under my bed on Cutter Street. In it, every birthday card I made for them that came back unopened, every text that went unanswered, a blue paracord bracelet Nora had woven for me at summer camp the July before all this, back when she still tied it on my wrist herself and told me I had to wear it for protection. I'd worn it until the divorce, and then one Wednesday she saw it on my wrist and said, "Why do you still have that?" and held out her hand until I gave it back. I put it in the box. I couldn't throw it away, and I couldn't wear it. That's the whole story of those 2 years in one object. I want to give you one good Wednesday, because there were good Wednesdays. And they're the reason I didn't disappear. There was a Wednesday that spring when Sam decided I needed to know everything about a video game called Deep Reef, which is a game where you are a submarine, and he narrated the entire ocean to me over spaghetti for 41 minutes without stopping to breathe. I timed it, not to be annoyed, but because it was the happiest I'd been in months, and I wanted to remember exactly how long it lasted. Nora sat across from me pretending to be too old for us, correcting Sam's facts, sneaking looks at me when she thought I wasn't watching. At the end, walking them to the door where Diane's car idled, Sam hugged me, really hugged me, the kind where they hang their whole weight off your neck, and then remembered he wasn't supposed to, and let go, and got in the car, looking guilty. And Nora, last out, stopped in the doorway and said, "Quiet." The spaghetti was good. 4 words. From a kid who'd been taught I was a hole where a father should be, 4 words was a cathedral. I lived on Wednesdays. A man can survive on a shockingly small amount of his own children, if he has to, but he shouldn't have to. Nobody should have to ration their own kids by the teaspoon. Then Vanessa started chipping the Wednesdays away. Not all at once. She was too careful for that, and the court order gave me the Wednesday in writing. Instead, the cancellations came one at a time, always medical, always at the last minute. A text on a Monday. "Nora's too upset to come tonight. Big scan tomorrow. She needs mommy." A text on a Wednesday afternoon. "Sam has a fever, staying in." Half my Wednesdays evaporated into fevers and scans that no one could contradict, because who demands a sick woman prove her child's fever? I kept showing up for the ones that survived. I never once texted back anything, but okay, give them my love. I'll be here next week. Iris told me to save every message, every cancellation, every last-minute scan that always seemed to land on my night. "Someday, the pattern is the evidence," she said. So I saved them. And the box under my bed got one more unopened birthday card, and the ache in my chest learned a new shape, and I did the only thing I could do, which was document, and keep the porch light on for a Wednesday that might not come. But here's the thing about a slow, careful man who writes everything down. The details pile up, and when you have no power to change anything, you start to just notice. I noticed her hair grew back the color it never was. I noticed that in 3 years of chemo, I never once got a call to take a sick child to a parent who was too weak to drive, even though I lived 12 minutes away and had offered 100 times. I noticed that on the weekends I had the kids. Vanessa's Instagram showed her at farmers markets, at a lake, at a concert in Columbus, energetic and glowing, and then Monday she was frail again for the fundraiser posts. I told myself I was a bitter man looking for cracks in a sick woman because it would make my own failure smaller. I told myself that for a long time. Shame is a very effective gag. And then, one Saturday in March, I found the box. Not the box under my bed, a different box, because here's a detail I left out. I still kept my good tools in the garage of the house I was still paying for. Vanessa didn't drive a manual, didn't own a stud finder, didn't care what lived on the workbench, so the garage stayed mine the way a drawer in a house stays yours after you leave. Forgotten, unguarded. That Saturday, I went to get my circular saw for a job, and it wasn't on its hook, and I started opening the plastic bins on the shelf above the bench to find it. The saw wasn't in any of them, but in the third bin down, under a layer of Christmas lights, was a shoebox that did not belong in a garage. I want to tell you I didn't open it. I opened it. Inside, a receipt from a wig company in Cincinnati, dated 3 years back. 2 units, premium human hair, medical. A second receipt, more recent, 1 unit, fine density, thinning style. A boxed medical port kit, the kind of subcutaneous port a real chemo patient gets implanted in the chest, except it was still in its factory shrink wrap, sealed, never opened, never used, the sticker intact. You don't keep a sealed, unused port for 3 years if a surgeon put a real one in your chest. You keep a sealed port if you needed the outline of one under a shirt and never needed the thing itself. And, under all of it, a single index card in Vanessa's handwriting, bullet points, a script. Daddy left because he can't handle mommy being sick. It's not your fault. Some grown-ups aren't strong. We don't talk about it at school. It's private. Talking points. for my children, in my wife's handwriting, in a shoebox, in the garage, under the Christmas lights. I stood there with that card in my hand, and I felt the closest thing to rage I would let myself feel in 3 years. And then, and this is the part I need you to understand, because it's the part they count on, I talked myself out of it. I told myself a scared woman facing cancer might buy a good wig and rehearse how to tell her kids. I told myself the sealed port could be a spare, a backup, anything. I told myself the index card was just a grieving mother trying to protect her children from adult ugliness. I told myself I was a bitter man rifling through a dying woman's private things, looking for a reason to feel less like a failure. And what kind of monster does that? Shame is the most effective lock there is. She didn't even have to hide the box well. She only had to make sure that if I ever found it, I'd be too ashamed of my own suspicion to trust it. And it worked. I put the box back under the Christmas lights. I put the saw theft down to a borrowed tool. I drove home and I said nothing to anyone, not even Iris, because saying it out loud would have made me the man the whole town already thought I was. That was my lowest, quietest failure, not losing custody. This, holding the truth in my own 2 hands, in a garage and setting it back on the shelf because a lie had taught me to distrust my own eyes. I would need my 11-year-old to be braver than I was to get me to pick it back up. Which brings me to the following Saturday, in April, when Sam left his inhaler at my place, and I drove it over, and Nora met me at the door, and she didn't take the inhaler. She just stood there, and she asked me a question that I have replayed 1,000 times since. "Dad," she said, "Dad, not Theo, when you have chemo, does your hair fall out of your arms too?" I said, "I think so, honey. Why?" Nora looked back over her shoulder into the house. Then she stepped out onto the porch and pulled the door mostly shut behind her, and my heart did something painful because I recognized the caution. It was mine. She'd learned to be careful the same way I had. "Mommy's arms have hair," she said, quiet, and her eyebrows never went away. Ava's mom had cancer, and her eyebrows fell off, and she drew them on, and Mommy eats everything. And she goes to Zumba on Tuesdays with Grandma when she thinks I'm at Ava's. She wasn't crying. She was doing something worse than crying. She was thinking, "And I'm not supposed to say any of that," she added, "because it's mean, because Mommy's sick." I got down to her level. Every cell in my body wanted to say the thing I'd wanted to say for 3 years. She's not sick. She never was. I didn't say it because I still didn't know. Not for certain. Not the way you need to know before you set a bomb off in your kids' lives. So I said the truest thing I could stand on. "Nora, it is never mean to ask a real question. You are allowed to want to know true things. That's not being bad. That's being smart and being brave." She chewed on that. Then she said, "Can I see Mommy's doctor papers, the real ones? I want to see her name on them." An 11-year-old asking for a file. I told her I'd try to find out how a person could do that. I meant it as comfort. I had no idea it was a prophecy. She handed me back the inhaler to give to Sam later, a thin excuse to keep me 1 more second. And then she said, so low I almost missed it, "I called you a coward. In the lawyer's office. I'm sorry. Grandma told me to say it. She wrote it on a card." She wrote it on a card. I drove home and sat in the truck in the lot outside my building for 40 minutes without turning off the engine. You've been patient with me, so let me ask you something real, and I want you to answer before I tell you what I did next. If you were me, no proof yet, just a daughter's questions and a bad feeling. Do you keep the peace and protect the kids from a war, or do you finally pull the thread? Tell me what you'd have done, because I promise you, whatever you're thinking, it wasn't as simple as it sounds from the outside. The next Monday, I did the most boring, most powerful thing I have ever done. I called my health insurance company, not the pharmacy, not a lawyer, not Vanessa, the insurance company, because I'm the policyholder and Vanessa and both kids were still my dependents on the plan, and I had a perfectly ordinary reason to call. I was finalizing a divorce and needed a full claims history to divide medical costs. The woman on the phone was kind and bored. She emailed me a claims summary, every dollar the plan had paid, going back 4 years by provider, by date, by procedure code. I opened it at my kitchen table with a cup of coffee going cold. Sam's asthma, Nora's broken wrist from the trampoline, my own root canal, 100 ordinary line items of a family staying alive. And under Vanessa Ashbrook, a wellness visit in 2022, a dermatology appointment, a prescription for an anti-anxiety medication in early 2023, and then for 3 years of stage 2 breast cancer, for 3 years of chemotherapy that took her hair and her strength, and my children. Nothing. No oncologist, no infusion center, no chemotherapy, no mastectomy, no imaging, no biopsy, not one code, not $1. In 3 years, the plan had not paid for a single thing that a cancer patient's plan pays for, because there had not been a single thing. I sat very still. I'm not a dramatic man. I didn't shout or throw the mug. I just felt the floor of the last 3 years drop out from under me, quietly, the way a fuse blows. No sound, just the sudden dark. Then a colder thought arrived, and it was the electrician in me, the one who reads the whole system before he touches a wire. A claim summary isn't proof of a fraud. It's proof of an absence. A good lawyer, her lawyer, could say she paid cash, she was treated out of network, she went somewhere the plan didn't cover. Absence isn't a weapon. I needed presence. I needed someone who could stand up and say, I was there, and she was not. I needed the one place her whole story leaned on, because in every telling for 3 years, Vanessa had named it. On the GoFundMe, to the custody evaluator, to the whole town. She'd said she was being treated at St. Bridget Cancer Center, 2 towns over, by their oncology team. She'd named the building she'd never walked into. That was her mistake, and it was about to be mine to use, if I could find one honest person inside those walls. I want to slow down here because the next part is where I almost got it wrong, and it matters. The day after the claim summary, I drove to Delmar Pharmacy to pick up Sam's refill. Gerald Whitfield has run that counter for 20 years. My kids' whole lives are in his system, and standing there, waiting, I did something I hadn't planned. I asked him, casually, like it was nothing, whether he could transfer Vanessa's prescriptions to a new pharmacy near her now that we were splitting up. He tapped his keyboard, frowned, tapped again. Sir, he said slowly, there's nothing here for her to transfer. Nothing oncology, nothing. He scrolled. Nothing that isn't 3 years old and unrelated. You sure you've got the right? I'm sure, I said. Say it again. He looked up at me over his glasses, and something in my face made him careful. There's no cancer treatment on file for Vanessa Ashbrook, he said. Not through us. Not that any pharmacy in the network has flagged. And with chemo, believe me, there'd be a trail a mile long. Anti-nausea meds alone. There's nothing. Ever. 2 people now. The insurance and the pharmacist. 2 absences. I drove home with my hands at 10 and 2 and my mind going 100 miles an hour. And here is where I almost got it wrong. I wanted to march into that house and tell my children the truth that same night. I wanted to hand Nora the claim summary and say, look, you were right. You were always right. Your father is not a coward, and your mother is not dying. I didn't do it, because I finally understood the shape of the trap. If I told the kids first, and it turned into my word against their mothers, a bitter ex-husband waving a printout versus a mother they loved who cried and said he's lying, he's finally found a way to hurt me, I would lose them for good. I would become exactly the monster the story needed me to be. The lie had survived 3 years precisely because it lived in a place where facts felt cruel and feelings felt true. I could not win this in my kitchen. I had to win it in the one arena where an absence becomes a presence, where a person has to answer under oath, where he's just bitter, doesn't beat a records custodian and a nurse. I called a real lawyer this time, a good one. Spencer Holloway, who did family law like a man diffusing ordnance. Slow, certain, no wasted motion. I laid it all on his conference table. The claim summary, the dates from the GoFundMe, the name of the center, Nora's questions, written down. Spencer read for a long time. Then he took off his glasses. If this is what it looks like, he said, it isn't just a custody problem. Faking a terminal illness to solicit donations is charity fraud. Using it to obtain custody is fraud on the court. But I have to warn you, he leaned back. People who build a lie this big don't fold when you tap them. They escalate. The second she smells this, she will move fast. And she will use the kids as the shield, because the kids are the only shield she has left. He was right. God, he was right. Spencer's plan was patient, and it was legal, and it did not involve me saying one word to my children about their mother's health. It involved a subpoena to St. Bridget Cancer Center for any and all treatment records for Vanessa Ashbrook. If she'd been there, they'd produce a chart. If she hadn't, they'd produce the most powerful document in the world, a sworn statement that no such patient existed. We filed to reopen the custody arrangement on the grounds of material misrepresentation. We requested the medical records, and then we waited because the law is a slow machine, and St. Bridget, like every hospital, took its time. The first thing I did once Spencer told me how to do it without breaking any law was go back for the box. It was still there, under the Christmas lights, in a garage I was still legally paying for and still had every right to enter. Spencer walked me through it on the phone like a man reading a bomb disposal manual. Photograph everything in place before you touch it. Note the date and time. Don't alter. Take it to my office. We log it. So I did. The wig receipts. The sealed port, factory shrink wrap intact, 3 years old. The index card in her handwriting. The talking points for my kids. When Spencer saw the sealed port kit on his conference table, he picked it up, turned it over once, and set it down very gently, the way you set down something that's going to matter a great deal. A woman who had a port put in, he said, has a surgical scar and an implantation record and a removal record. A woman who bought a sealed one to keep in a shoebox has a prop. He looked at me. This is the difference between a story and a stage, and juries and judges understand stages. We built a wall in his conference room, not literally a corkboard with red string. Spencer was too dignified for that, but a timeline printed and taped 3 years long. The GoFundMe posts dated, the custody filings dated, Vanessa's own public Instagram, the lake, the concert, the outlet mall with 4 bags, dated, and laid right beside the fundraiser posts from the same weeks where she was too weak to lift a casserole dish. Iris drove down and sat with us for a whole Saturday, reading the medical claims summary line by line with a nurse's eye, saying things like, there'd be a CBC every cycle, there'd be Neupogen, there'd be anti-emetics, there'd be $1,000 a week of ordinary garbage, and there is nothing. Theo, there is a wellness visit and an anxiety script and a dermatology appointment for what was probably a mole. For the first time in 3 years, I wasn't a bitter man with a feeling. I was a careful man with a wall. But I want to be honest about the part that didn't work, because it matters. I tried once to shortcut it. Before the subpoena, I called St. Bridget myself and asked plainly whether Vanessa Ashbrook had ever been a patient. The woman in medical records was polite and immovable. She could not confirm or deny whether anyone was or wasn't a patient. Privacy law. HIPAA. She wasn't allowed to tell me my own wife had never walked through their doors. Because confirming the absence of a patient is still information about a patient. I hung up and stared at the phone. The very law built to protect the sick was standing guard over a woman who was faking being sick. The lie had better legal cover than the truth. That was the dead end that taught me the real lesson. I could not get this by asking. Absence hides behind privacy. The only way to turn an absence into a presence was to force it into a room where a person had to answer, under subpoena, under oath, or in front of 100 witnesses who could do their own math. A phone call would never do it. It had to be public or it had to be sworn. There was no third door. So I stopped looking for a shortcut and I settled in to wait for the slow machine. And while I waited, I built the rest of the wall. Gerald Whitfield, the pharmacist, agreed to put in writing what he'd told me at the counter. No oncology prescriptions on file for Vanessa Ashbrook in 3 years, and, he added, with real chemo, the pharmacy record alone would run to dozens of line items. Iris signed an affidavit as a registered nurse, walking a reader through the claims summary the way she'd walked me through it. Every ordinary, unglamorous thing a real cancer costs, and the blank where all of it should have been. Spencer formally logged the port kit, the wig receipts, the index card. And then Spencer looked at the whole wall and told me the truth I didn't want to hear. It's a mountain, he said, and it's still all absence. A wig isn't a crime. A sealed box isn't a crime. Cash pay treatment out of state isn't a crime. Her lawyer will stand up and say she was treated privately, quietly, out of network. And every gap in your mountain turns back into her privacy. You have everything, Theo, except the one thing that turns a mountain of absence into a fact. He tapped the table once, a living person who was supposed to be in the room, and will say she never was. Everything else on this wall supports that person. Without that person, you've built the most detailed shrug in the history of Ohio. I didn't have that person. I didn't even know their name. There was one more thing on the wall that kept me up at night, and it wasn't medical. It was the money. Because the GoFundMe, the meal train collections, the 2 church love offerings, Iris and I added it up one night, line by public line, and it came to just over $11,000 raised in Vanessa's name for treatment that never happened. And chemotherapy that doesn't exist doesn't have bills. So the money went somewhere. I found a new SUV in the driveway of the house I was still paying the mortgage on. I found a wellness retreat tagged in Vanessa's photos. I found, when I really looked, that Diane had been the administrator on every fund, the treasurer of a charity for a disease that was never in the room. I didn't fully understand yet what that meant legally, but I understood it morally, and I wrote it at the top of the wall in Spencer's office, in marker. One question that a whole town had somehow never thought to ask out loud in 3 years. If there was no cancer, where did the money go? I didn't know it yet, but that exact question, in almost those exact words, was going to come out of my 11-year-old daughter's mouth in a crowded room and end everything. I only knew where my witness worked, because Vanessa, for 3 years, had told the entire world exactly which building to look in. And I decided then to make a choice I need you to understand, because it's the whole difference between me and her. I kept being kind to my kids. I did not pull Nora aside and recruit her. I did not tell Sam anything. On the Wednesdays that survived, I helped Sam build a crooked birdhouse in the apartment parking lot and let him paint it a color that does not occur in nature. And I told Nora, when she looked at me sideways over the paint cans, only this: I'm working on getting the real papers. It might take a while. You didn't do anything wrong by asking. Okay? Okay, she said, and she almost smiled. Vanessa, meanwhile, felt the ground move. Spencer was right about that, too. Within a week of the subpoena landing at St. Bridget, the fundraising machine roared to a level I'd never seen. Diane announced, on the GoFundMe to the whole town, that Vanessa's cancer had returned aggressive, that she was entering a new phase, and that the family was organizing a benefit dinner to help with final expenses and to give Vanessa's children memories to hold on to. Final expenses. She was preparing the town to grieve a woman who was, at that moment, at Zumba on Tuesdays. And she was preparing the courtroom too, because a woman dying faster is a woman the court rushes to protect. If Vanessa could get a hospice narrative in front of a judge before my records came back, she could lock the kids down for the time she has left. And my subpoena would look like a cruelty aimed at a dying mother's last months. It was a brilliant, monstrous move. Speed against truth, grief against paper. And she opened a second front at the same time, because that's what people who've done this for 3 years do. They never push on just one wall. Her lawyer filed to relocate. Vanessa wanted to move the children 2 hours south to Cincinnati to be closer to a specialized treatment and hospice program for whatever time remains. On paper, it was mercy. In practice, it was a knife aimed at the last artery I had, because a father 2 hours away doesn't get a Wednesday dinner, doesn't get a swim meet, doesn't get a birthday he's steered away from. He gets a phone call on a screen, if he's lucky, supervised by the very people teaching his kids to fear him. Cincinnati wasn't about a hospital. Cincinnati was about distance, about making me a face on a tablet until I gave up, the way men in my position are quietly engineered to give up. I sat in Spencer's office and looked at that filing and felt the old despair try to climb back in. Because here's the thing about fighting a lie. Even when you're right, the liar sets the clock. She was moving fast on 2 fronts. Hospice and relocation, and my one true document was still crawling through a records department, and the law does not reward the honest man for being honest. It rewards whoever gets to the judge first with a story that's easy to feel. She's trying to get you to Cincinnati before St. Bridget answers, Spencer said. If she's 2 hours away with a hospice narrative and a relocation order, your subpoena starts to look like a bitter man chasing a dying woman across state lines. Timing is the whole war now. Hers is fast. Ours is true. We need true to get faster. True does not get faster. That's the cruel joke of it. Truth waits its turn in line while a lie sprints. All I could do was hold my place in that line and pray it moved before Saturday. I ran into Vanessa exactly once in those 13 days. The grocery store, a Tuesday, frozen aisle. She had a full cart and a healthy flush and a phone pressed to her ear, mid-laugh, and she saw me, and I watched the transformation happen in real time. The shoulders curled, the laugh died, the hand went to the cart for support she didn't need. In 4 seconds, she went from a woman planning a weekend to a woman barely upright. She murmured, "I have to go," into the phone and moved past me slow and frail, and a stranger nearby actually reached out to steady her elbow. I didn't say a word. I just stood there holding a bag of frozen peas, watching a person put on a body like a coat, and I understood, really understood for the first time all the way down, that this was not a scared woman who'd gotten in over her head. This was a performance she could summon in 4 seconds in a frozen food aisle for an audience of one stranger and one ex-husband. That's not fear, that's craft, and craft doesn't stop on its own. That was the day I stopped feeling sorry for her, right there between the peas and the waffles. Meanwhile, Nora had gone silent in a way that frightened me more than any outburst. On my surviving Wednesdays, she barely spoke. She'd sit and draw and answer in single words. But on the last Wednesday before the dinner, as I walked her out, she stopped at the car and said without looking up, "The school nurse asked me if everything was okay at home." I said yes. A beat. I don't know why I said yes, it's not. Then she got in the car. That was all. But I drove home and I thought, she's still noticing. Under all that quiet, she's still keeping her own record, same as her father. God help her, same as me. The benefit dinner was set for a Saturday in July at the Del Mar Community Hall. 90, 100 people. The mayor was going to come. There would be a banner. There would be a slideshow. Diane asked the pastor to speak. And on the invitation, in careful cursive, it said the guest of honor's family would be making an important announcement about Vanessa's care and her children's future. Her children's future. I read that line and I knew, whatever this was going to be, it was going to happen out loud, in front of the whole town, on that Saturday. The only question was whether my one honest document would arrive from St. Bridget before then, or one day too late. Here's the thing a cornered liar does that a decent person never sees coming. She doesn't defend herself. She reaches for the thing you love most and puts it between you and her. The closer the subpoena got, the harder Vanessa pressed on the kids. Sam's birthday was that June. He turned 8. I'd bought him the Deep Reef submarine set. The real one. The expensive one. The whole reef. And I'd arranged with Vanessa, in writing, weeks ahead, that I'd come by for an hour to give it to him. She confirmed. In writing. I showed up at the door with the box wrapped in blue paper, and Diane opened it. And behind her, the house was full of kids and pizza and a banner, a party I hadn't been told was happening. And Diane said, sweet as anything, so the neighbors on the lawn could hear, "Oh, Theo, now's really not a good time. Sam's overwhelmed. Maybe leave it on the porch." And she started to close the door, and Sam saw me. Over her shoulder, my son saw me holding his blue present, and his whole face opened up. "Dad." And he started toward me, and Vanessa appeared out of nowhere and put both hands on his shoulders and steered him back toward the cake, gently, smiling, saying something in his ear, and he went. He looked back once, then he went. I left the submarine on the porch. I drove to the end of the street, and I sat there, and I did not cry, because I'd learned not to, and that's its own kind of loss, learning not to cry at the thing that should break you. 2 days later, Sam thanked me for the present in a text that Vanessa clearly typed, all correct punctuation, no 8-year-old alive, and I wrote back, "You're so welcome, buddy, I love you." And I got no reply. And that was the whole birthday. That's when Nora started getting the worst of it, because Nora was the one asking questions, and questions were the one thing the lie could not survive. She told me later, much later, what those weeks were like inside that house, how Grandma sat her down and explained that Daddy had found a lawyer to attack Mommy, and that the questions Nora had been asking were the very weapon Daddy wanted. That by wondering about the doctor papers, Nora had been helping him hurt Mommy without even knowing it. Imagine that. Taking an 11-year-old's honest doubt and teaching her it was a knife she'd been tricked into holding. Teaching a child to be ashamed of her own mind. That's the cruelest thing in this whole story. Crueler than the wigs, crueler than the money, and I will never fully forgive it. Nora stopped asking questions after that. She went quiet, And a quiet Nora scared me more than an angry one because I knew that under the quiet she was still doing the thing she couldn't stop doing. The thing she got from me, she was noticing and carrying it alone. Meanwhile, the town got louder. The final season post went up. The GoFundMe leapt $4,000 in a week. A second casserole rotation started. 2 different people I'd worked with unfriended me and posted without naming me about men who abandoned dying wives and praying for those poor babies. Someone left a note on my truck in the job site lot. I won't repeat what it said. I kept it. I keep everything. I was 13 days from the dinner. My subpoena was still crawling through St. Bridget's records department. My daughter had gone silent. My son had been steered away from me at his own birthday. And the whole town was being tuned day by day to grieve a woman who was going to Zumba on Tuesdays. And then on a Thursday night, my phone rang with a number I almost didn't answer. Here's where I want to introduce you to the person who broke my heart in the best possible way. Renata Kessler, Vanessa's younger sister, 30 years old, a dental hygienist, the kind of person who apologizes when you bump into her. For 3 years, Renata had been at every fundraiser, holding the donation jar, wearing the pink ribbon, believing. Or I'd assumed she believed. I'd lumped her in with Diane with the whole apparatus. That was lazy of me. It was Renata. A Kessler calling me was never good news, and I braced for whatever new cruelty this was. She was crying before she got a sentence out. Theo, I need to ask you something, and I need you to tell me the truth, even though I've been horrible to you. A shaky breath. Did you get papers from a lawyer about Nessa's records? I said carefully that there was a legal process happening. Yes. Because she asked me to do something last week, Renata said, and I've been sick about it ever since. And now the dinner, and this hospice thing, and She stopped, started again. 3 years ago, she asked me to go with her to buy the wigs. She said the good ones look real, and I don't know what I thought. I thought maybe she couldn't face doing it alone. But last week, she called me and asked me to buy a second wig, a thinner one. Like it's getting worse, she said. Like it's near the end. And she laughed, Theo. She laughed when she said it. And I've been her sister my whole life, and I have never once seen her at a doctor, not one time. And I keep telling myself sisters don't go to appointments together. That's normal, but... Renata, I said gently, has she ever in 3 years been too weak to do something she wanted to do? Silence on the line. A long one. No, she whispered. Only when people are watching. I did not push her. I want you to know that. It would have been so easy to pull Renata in to make her my weapon, to load her up with everything I knew and point her at that dinner. Instead, I said, I'm not asking you to do anything. I'm not asking you to pick a side against your sister. I only have one thing I want, and it isn't revenge. I want my kids to know true things. That's all. Whatever's true. If she's sick, I'll drop all of it and spend every dollar I have helping her. And if she's not, then 2 children have been carrying a weight for 3 years that isn't theirs to carry. Either way, they deserve the truth. Not my version, the real one. Renata cried harder at that. And then she said something I'll never forget. That's the difference, she said. She'd never say that. She'd never once put the kids before winning. She asked me what she should do. I told her the honest thing. Talk to a lawyer of your own if you want to protect yourself. Tell the truth if you're asked under oath. And past that, be their aunt. Whatever happens, those kids are going to need people who love them and didn't lie to them. You can still be one of those people. It's not too late for you. It might be too late for her. It's not too late for you. She was quiet. Then, the dinner's Saturday. Diane's going to announce hospice, and she's going to say... Renata's voice cracked. She's going to have Nora read something. A letter. To the town about missing her mom already. Nora doesn't want to. She told me she doesn't want to, and Diane told her good girls do hard things for family. They were going to put my daughter on a stage to grieve a mother who wasn't dying. I hung up and I called Spencer and I said one word. Saturday. He said, the records aren't back yet. St. Bridget's custodian says maybe next week. If you stand up at a public dinner and accuse a dying woman of fraud with no document in your hand, Theo, you will hand her the sympathy vote for the rest of your life. You'll be the man who ambushed his cancer-stricken ex at a charity event. Even if you're right, you'll look insane. Wait for the paper. She's going to put Nora on a stage, I said. Spencer was quiet a long time. "Then we go," he said finally, "and we pray the paper is faster than the microphone. But Theo, if it isn't, you have to be ready to walk out of that room with nothing. Can you do that? Can you sit there and let it happen if the document doesn't come?" I didn't answer him because I didn't know. I want to tell you about the 2 days before that dinner because they were the lowest I have ever been, and I think some of you know exactly the floor I'm describing. Friday morning, Spencer called. St. Bridget's records custodian had responded to the subpoena with a request for a 2-week extension to conduct a thorough search. Standard, legal, devastating. It meant the sworn statement I needed, the one honest document that said she was never here, would not exist in any form I could use until long after the dinner, long after Diane's hospice announcement, long after my daughter stood on a stage and read a letter mourning a living woman. Friday afternoon, it got worse. Vanessa's lawyer filed an emergency motion, accusing me of harassing a terminally ill mother with abusive discovery, and asking the court to suspend even my Wednesday dinners to protect the children's remaining time with their mother from their father's campaign of intimidation. Read that again. She was using my search for the truth as proof I was a monster. The better my aim got, the more dangerous I looked. That's how these lies defend themselves. They turn your reaching hand into a weapon in the story. Friday night, Nora called me. She never called me. My hands actually shook picking up. She was whispering. She was in a closet, I think. Her voice had that muffled, hidden sound. "Dad, Grandma says you're trying to hurt Mommy with a lawyer because you're angry. She says that's why you asked about the doctor papers, that you tricked me into helping you." A pause. A small, broken breath. "Did you? Did you use me?" And there it was. The knife. Turned all the way around. They'd taken the one honest thing my daughter had done, asking a real question, and they'd made her ashamed of it. They'd made her think her own doubt was a weapon her father had planted in her. "Nora," I said, and my voice was not steady. I won't pretend it was. "I would never use you. You asked a real question because you're smart and you're brave, and that's yours, not mine. I'm not trying to hurt your mom. I'm trying to find out what's true. That's different. And I know it doesn't feel different from where you're standing tonight." She was crying now. "I don't know what's true. I don't know what's true anymore, and everybody's yelling, and Grandma wants me to read a letter tomorrow, and I don't want to, and I don't know why I don't want to." "Then don't read it," I said. "You never have to say words that aren't yours, not for anyone, not even for me. If you don't want to stand up tomorrow, you don't stand up. That's allowed. I promise you that's allowed. Grandma says good girls do hard things for family." "Good girls," I said, "tell the truth, even when it's the hardest thing, especially then. And if nobody's ever told you that you're allowed to, then let me be the one who did." She was quiet. Then the line went dead. Someone had come, I think. I sat on the floor of my apartment with my back against the couch, and I took Nora's blue bracelet out of the box under my bed, and I held it in both hands. And for the first time in 3 years, I let myself think the sentence I'd been holding back. I might lose. She might win. My kids might spend their whole childhood inside a lie, and I might have no document in my hand to stop it. And tomorrow, they might put my daughter on a stage, and there might be nothing I can do but watch. That was the bottom. Friday night, on the floor, holding a bracelet a child had made me back when she still tied it on herself. Iris found me there. She'd driven down from Columbus without telling me, let herself in with the key I'd given her, and found her little brother sitting on the floor of a one-bedroom apartment holding a paracord bracelet like it was the last warm thing on earth. She sat down next to me, on the floor, in her scrubs, and she didn't say anything for a while. That's a nurse thing. They know when a room doesn't need words yet. Then she said, "Tell me the plan for tomorrow." "There is no plan," I said. "The records aren't back. Spencer says if I stand up at that dinner with nothing but a printout, I hand her the sympathy vote forever. I become the man who ambushed his dying ex at a charity event. Even if I'm right, I look insane." "He's not wrong," Iris said, "so don't stand up with a printout." She turned and looked at me. "Theo, you keep saying you don't have a person, but she's the one who built the dinner. Who does a woman invite to a benefit for the cancer that saved her reputation? She invites the heroes, the care team, the nurses and doctors who supposedly pulled her through. She has to. It's the whole show. Iris let that land. You've been looking for your one honest witness for a month. What if she's mailing them an invitation? What if the one person who can end this is going to walk through that door tomorrow because Vanessa's ego couldn't resist honoring a care team that doesn't exist? I looked at my sister. 20 years of reading bodies and lies and the small tells. People don't know they're giving. And if no one from St. Bridget shows, I said, then I have nothing. And I sit there, and I watch them put Nora on a stage. Then you sit there, Iris said, and you let your daughter see one adult in that room who never once asked her to lie. That's not nothing, Theo. On the worst possible night, that's not nothing. She squeezed my hand. But I don't think it comes to that. Go early. Read the name tags before you do a single other thing. Find your person before Diane finds her microphone. I didn't sleep, but I stopped drowning. Somewhere around 4 in the morning, I put the bracelet in my jacket pocket, the inside one, over the chest, and I decided that whatever happened at that dinner, my kids were going to see me walk in with my head up, because a boy and a girl were going to remember this night for the rest of their lives, and I was going to give them a father worth remembering, win or lose. Saturday came anyway. The Del Mar Community Hall is a big beige room with a stage at one end and folding tables dressed up in white paper. By 6 o'clock, there were maybe 100 people, a banner over the stage, hope for Vanessa with her face, an old photo, healthy, smiling, a slideshow cycling on a screen, pink everywhere, a donation table by the door with Diane behind it, in her element, counting envelopes. I almost didn't go in. Spencer met me in the parking lot. He had no document. The subpoena was frozen. All he had was a legal pad and a warning. If you stand up in there with nothing but a printout and a feeling, he said, her lawyer will eat you alive, and you'll deserve it. Absence isn't proof. You need a person. Do you have a person? I looked at the door, and I told him what Iris had told me on the floor of my apartment the night before. Maybe I do, I said. Vanessa's spent 3 years telling everyone she's treated at St. Bridget, and this is a benefit for that cancer. Diane loves a tribute too much not to invite the care team, the nurses, the doctors who supposedly saved her. My sister thinks Vanessa's ego mailed my witness an invitation. Spencer went still, then slowly he nodded. A hospital employee in that room, honoring a patient they've never treated. He almost smiled. That's not an ambush. That's just letting an honest person notice what's in front of them. He put a hand on my shoulder. Then don't say a word until you find them. Read the name tags first. I walked in and I scanned the room. Not for Vanessa, not for Diane, for a name tag. And by the coffee, next to a woman in scrubs she'd clearly worn straight off a shift, was a small printed card that said, Bridget Callahan, RN, St. Bridget Cancer Center. Diane had invited an oncology nurse to honor a patient the oncology nurse had never met. I did not rush her. I got a cup of coffee. I stood next to Bridget Callahan, and I said quietly, You work oncology at St. Bridget? 9 years, she said, friendly, tired. You family? I'm Vanessa's husband, I said, soon to be ex. Can I ask you something strange, and will you tell me the honest answer, even if it's awkward? She looked at me. Nurses have a radar for the moment the small talk ends. Do you know Vanessa Ashbrook as a patient? Have you ever, in 3 years, seen her on the floor? Bridget Callahan went very still. She looked up at the banner, at the healthy, smiling face, at the pink, at the slideshow, and then back at me. And I watched a professional woman do the fast, quiet math of 9 years of faces. I was told, she said slowly, that I was invited tonight because I'd been part of her care. That's what the invitation said. Her care team. A pause. Sir, I run the infusion schedule. I know every patient who's come through that unit for the better part of a decade. I don't forget a face. And I especially don't forget a young mother with 2 little kids, because those are the ones that keep me up. She swallowed. I have never seen that woman in my life. And when I got the invitation, I told myself I must have just missed her. That's what I told myself on the drive over, but I didn't miss her. She was never there. Would you say that? I asked. If someone asked you. Not to hurt anyone. Just the truth. I'm a mandatory reporter and a nurse, and my whole job is telling people hard, true things, she said, her jaw set. If someone asks me, I do not lie, especially not at a party raising money off a cancer I know she doesn't have. I thanked her, And then, for a minute, I just stood at the edge of that room and looked at my children. Sam in the front row, swinging his feet, holding a program he couldn't read, not understanding any of it, just glad to be somewhere with cake. And Nora beside him, rigid, the folded letter in her lap, staring at it like it might bite her. My daughter, 11 years old, dressed up to grieve a woman who was going to Zumba on Tuesday, holding words her grandmother had written for her the way she'd once been handed the word coward on an index card. I felt the bracelet in my jacket pocket, over my chest, and I made myself a promise standing there. Whatever happened in the next 10 minutes, whether Bridget spoke or froze, whether the room turned or turned on me, I was not going to let my daughter stand up on that stage and say words that weren't hers. That was the one line. Everything else I could lose and survive. Not that. I found a chair at the back, and I sat, and I waited. And my heart was going like a hammer, and I kept my face very still, because a boy and a girl were about to watch their father in the worst room of his life, and I wanted them to see a calm man, even if I wasn't one, especially because I wasn't one. And that's when Diane tapped the microphone. The room hushed. Diane welcomed everyone. She thanked the church, the mayor, the incredible community. She dabbed her eyes. She said Vanessa was too weak to speak long tonight. And there was Vanessa, up on the stage now, in a chair, in a thin second wig, a blanket over her lap in July, playing the last act of a 3-year performance to a packed house. Sam sat in the front row, small and confused, holding a program, and beside him, in a stiff dress, a folded letter in her hands, was Nora, white-knuckled, staring at the letter like it was a live wire. Diane said the words, "The doctors have told us Vanessa is entering her final season. Hospice will begin next week." Gasps. Someone sobbed. And so tonight, we're asking the community and the court to let Vanessa's children stay wrapped in her love for whatever time she has left, without disruption, without her children being dragged into an ugly fight by someone who left long ago. Her eyes found me at the back of the room. 100 heads turned to follow. Diane smiled at me. The GoFundMe smile. Vanessa's daughter, Nora, has written something she'd like to share. Come up, sweetheart. Nora didn't move. Nora, Diane said, warmer, harder. Come on. Good girls do hard things for family. And my daughter, 11 years old, stood up, and she turned around past the stage, past her grandmother, and she found me at the back of the room. And she looked at me with a question on her face that no child should have to ask in a crowded room. Is it okay? Do I have to? I gave the smallest shake of my head. No, you don't have to say words that aren't yours. Nora set the letter down on her chair. I don't want to read it, she said. Not loud, but the room was silent, so it carried. I wrote it because Grandma told me to. I don't think it's true. Diane's face flickered. Nora, is Mommy really dying? Nora said, and now her voice broke, and it was the bravest thing I have ever heard. Because her arms have hair, and she goes to Zumba, and nobody will show me the doctor papers. I just want to see the real papers. Why won't anybody show me the real papers? The room made a sound like a held breath. Vanessa stood up from her hospice chair, too fast for a dying woman. The blanket slid to the floor and snapped. Nora, sit down. You don't know what you're talking about. Sit down. In a voice with more force in it than any hospice patient has ever owned. 100 people heard the strength in it. You could feel the room tilt. And I stepped forward into the aisle, and I did the thing I'd driven there to do. I asked in the calmest voice I had to say one thing. Diane grabbed the microphone. You are not welcome to. He can speak. That was the pastor quietly from the side. A decent man in a room that was suddenly desperate to be decent. Let him speak. I didn't take the microphone. I didn't need it. I've spent my life making myself heard over generators and saws. A quiet room is nothing. I'm not going to accuse anyone, I said. I'm going to ask one question, and I'm going to let an honest person answer it. Vanessa, for 3 years you've told everyone in this room. You told the court. You told our kids. You told the strangers who gave you $11,000 that you've been treated for cancer at St. Bridget Cancer Center. Yes? She stared at me. She didn't say no. She couldn't. It was in the GoFundMe, in the court file, on the banner behind her practically. Diane invited Vanessa's care team here tonight to honor them, I said. One of them came. I turned. Ms. Callahan, you're an oncology nurse at St. Bridget. 9 years, you told me by the coffee 5 minutes ago before you knew any of this mattered. Have you ever once treated Vanessa Ashbrook? Every face turned to Bridget Callahan. She stepped forward. She did not enjoy it. That's how I knew it was true. I run the infusion floor at St. Bridget, she said, clear and steady. I have. For 9 years, I don't forget patients. And I never forget young mothers with cancer. They're the ones I carry home. I was invited here tonight as part of Vanessa's care team. She looked at the stage, at the wig, at the blanket on the floor. I have never seen this woman before in my life. She has never been our patient. There is no chemotherapy. There is no cancer. I'm sorry, but I will not stand in a room where people gave their money and their grief and let that go unsaid. Silence. Total. And then it broke in waves, exactly the way Spencer said a lie collapses. Not all at once, but person by person. Renata stood up first from the third row, shaking, and said, "She asked me to buy the wigs. Both of them. Last week, she asked me to buy a thinner one like it's getting worse. She's my sister, and I've never seen her sick a day in her life, and I've been too scared to say it, and I'm saying it now. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry, Nora. I'm so sorry, Sam." A woman from the church stood next. She told me she was too weak to bring a casserole dish back, and I dropped off meals for a year. Her voice hardened. I saw her at the outlet mall in April carrying 4 bags. A man near the front. I gave $800 to that fund. He was looking at the donation table, at Diane. Diane, who had run everything, made her one fatal move. The move of every architect of a lie when the building comes down. She reached for the microphone and she tried to save it. And in trying to save it, she buried it. Even if the details are complicated, Diane said. Fast, shrill. Vanessa has suffered. She has real conditions, anxiety. She's been through so much. And this man is attacking a fragile woman in front of her children to win a custody case. That's what this is. This is abuse. Grandma, Nora said, where did the money go? Out of the mouth of a child. The one question the whole room was thinking. Where did $11,000 for chemotherapy go? If there was no chemotherapy. Diane didn't answer. Diane's face did the answering. And then Spencer, who had come with me and stood quiet at the back the whole time, walked up the center aisle with a single item and set it on the donation table, next to the envelopes, under the banner, in the light. The port kit, still in its factory shrink wrap, sealed, 3 years old, the sticker intact. For anyone here who's donated toward Vanessa's chemotherapy, Spencer said, not loudly, this is a chemo port. It's what a real patient has surgically implanted in the chest to receive treatment. This one was purchased 3 years ago and has never been opened. It was found sealed in a shoebox in the family garage, beside receipts for 2 wigs and a card in Mrs. Ashbrook's handwriting instructing her children on what to say about their father. I'll say, I'm her husband's attorney. Every word of that is documented, and all of it is going in front of a judge. I just thought the people who paid for the treatment deserved to see the treatment. You could have heard a candle burn. The mayor stood up. He'd come to be photographed with a brave, dying mother. He looked at the sealed port, and at the banner, and at the healthy, smiling face on it, and he did the thing politicians do fastest of anything. He calculated. Then he picked up his coat and walked out without a word. And 3 tables worth of people watched him go and understood exactly what it meant. A woman near the front, Carol, who'd run the meal train for a solid year, who'd brought a dish to that house every Thursday through 2 winters, stood up with her hand pressed to her mouth. I have a daughter with real breast cancer, she said, and her voice shook with something past anger. She lost her hair. She lost a breast. She would give anything to be at Zumba on a Tuesday. And you... She couldn't finish. She just looked at the stage, at the blanket on the floor in July, and sat back down, and put her face in her hands. That was the wave that did it, not the paperwork. Carol, the real cancer in the room, standing up next to the fake one. And Vanessa knew it. I watched her know it. I watched 3 years of careful performance meet the one thing it could never survive, which was a room full of people no longer wanting to believe her. A dying woman gets the children, I said. Quiet, just to her. The line she'd said to me in a parking lot 2 years before, smiling. So sure. That's how this ends. Isn't that what you told me? I let it sit. You were right about one thing. It's ending, just not the way you rehearsed. And Vanessa. Vanessa, who had built all of it, who had told me a dying woman gets the children. Vanessa looked out at a room of 100 people who had loved her and fed her and paid for a lie, and she did not cry, and she did not apologize. She got angry. You have no idea what my life has been, she said to the room, to all of us, her voice climbing. No idea what it's like to be nobody, to be ordinary. My mother never looked at me once until I was sick as a kid, not once. And the only time this whole town ever loved me was these 3 years, so don't you dare. She caught herself. Too late. The sentence had already told the truth. She'd traded her children's father for the town's love, and she'd known exactly what she was doing. She looked at me then, and, under all the anger there was for 1 second, something almost human. A woman who'd been invisible her whole life and had finally been seen. Even if the seeing was a lie she'd have to feed forever. It didn't redeem her. Nothing about $11,000 and 3 years of my kids' lives gets redeemed by a sad childhood, but I understood her in that second, and understanding her was somehow worse than hating her. She looked for an exit, and there wasn't one. That's the thing about building a stage. When it goes with you standing on it, lit, in front of everyone. Diane tried to take her arm, and Vanessa pulled away from her own mother. Hard, and something passed between them, some final accounting of who had made whom, and then Vanessa walked down off that stage and up the center aisle toward the doors, past the donation table, past the sealed port under the banner, past 100 people who did not reach out to steady her elbow this time. No one performed the catch. No one believed the frailty anymore. She walked out under her own strength, which was considerable, which had always been considerable, and the doors swung shut behind her. And the blanket she'd worn in July stayed crumpled on the stage floor where it had fallen. Sam had started to cry, not because he understood, but because everyone around him was upset, and he was 8. I crossed the room, and I knelt down, and I held my son, finally, with both arms, the way I hadn't been allowed to in 3 years. And over his shoulder, I looked at Nora, and Nora looked back at me, and neither of us said anything. Because everything that needed saying had just been said out loud by a room full of strangers. If you've made it this far with me, I think you already know the person I want you to be tonight isn't the one who wins the fight. It's the one Nora was. The kid who was scared and confused and asked for the real papers anyway. If there's a real question you've been too afraid to ask because everyone told you it would be cruel, this is your sign. Ask it kindly. Ask it bravely. Truth handled with care isn't cruelty, it's the most loving thing there is. The rest happened the way the law happens, slower and quieter than the movies. But it happened. St. Bridget's records came back 2 weeks later, a sworn statement from the custodian that Vanessa Ashbrook had never been a patient, never had a chart, never received a single treatment. My insurance claim summary sat next to it. 3 years of blank where a cancer should have been. Bridget Callahan gave a statement. So did Renata. So, in her own careful 11-year-old words, did Nora. The custody arrangement didn't just reopen, it inverted. Judge Pendleton, the same court that had once been told no judge takes children from a woman with cancer, granted me primary custody in a hearing that took less than an hour because there was nothing left to argue. Fraud on the court is the one thing a court cannot forgive because it's the one thing aimed at the court itself. There's a criminal side too, soliciting $11,000 in charitable donations for a fabricated illness is a crime with a real name. And there's an investigation open, and I'm told a restitution order is likely. Diane's name is on the fund. Diane's name is on a lot of it. I'll let the process do what the process does. I'm done being anyone's judge. I just wanted my kids. Vanessa is not in prison and may never be. That's not the ending some of you want. And I understand. But I'll tell you what I've learned. The punishment that landed hardest wasn't legal. It was the room. It was 100 people who loved her walking to their cars in silence. It was being, at last, exactly as ordinary and unseen as the thing she'd been most afraid of. Except now with the whole town knowing why. She didn't lose to me. She lost to the truth. In front of everyone whose love she'd stolen. There's no scarf that covers that. Nora tied the bracelet back on my wrist 3 weeks ago. She didn't make a speech about it. She just found it in my truck console one afternoon. I'd started keeping it there. I don't fully know why. And she picked it up and looked at it. And then she took my hand and tied it on the way she used to, the double knot, for protection. And she said, "You wore it the whole time." "Not the whole time," I said. "You took it back once, remember?" "I remember everything," she said. 11 years old. "I'm the one who remembers everything." And that was true, and it broke my heart and put it back together in the same breath. Because remembering everything is a heavy job for a kid, and she'd been doing it alone, on the wrong side of a lie, for 3 years. Sam calls me Dad again. It came back on its own, the way it left. One ordinary Tuesday, mid-sentence, like it had never gone. I didn't make it a thing. Some things you just let come home. They live with me now, in a house with enough bedrooms, on a street where Nora doesn't ask me to park by the fence. Renata comes for dinner on Sundays. She's the aunt she said she'd be. There's a therapist, a good one, who's helping 2 kids unlearn a story they never should have been taught. It's slow. Untangling a lie takes longer than telling one. It always does. Some nights, Nora still asks me if I'm sure Mommy's really okay, really not dying, and I always tell her the same true thing. Your mom has some things she needs to fix, and none of them are cancer, and none of them are your fault, and you were right to ask. And she nods and files it with everything else she remembers, and sleeps a little easier. I spent 3 years being called a coward for staying quiet. I've made my peace with those 3 years. Because if being a coward means refusing to fight a war through your own children, refusing to hand them a printout and a grudge and make them choose, then I'd be a coward again. I didn't win my kids back by proving their mother was a liar. I won them back by being, every single Wednesday, the one adult who never once asked them to say something that wasn't true. If there's a child in your life carrying a weight that isn't theirs, a story they've been handed, a side they've been drafted onto, be the person who tells them the quietest, most radical thing there is. You're allowed to ask. You're allowed to want true things. It's not being bad, it's being brave. I keep the claims summary in a drawer. 3 years of blank paper. I don't look at it much anymore. I've got a bracelet on my wrist and 2 kids down the hall, and those are the only records I need now.